¿Cómo están? Bienvenidos nuevamente a otra entrevista en Exploración Espacial. Esta vez yo sigo con el tema del potencial corte de presupuesto que puede sufrir la NASA, propuesto por el Poder Ejecutivo, en este caso la Casa Blanca, por supuesto. Y la verdad es que hay muchísima preocupación en el ambiente espacial. Y quise hablar, fui a la fuente, dije, a ver, ¿quién es una de las personas que más sabe de política y presupuesto? Bueno, es Casey Dreier, que es el jefe de política espacial de la Sociedad Planetaria o de Planetary Society, que es una entidad, una organización sin fines de lucro, fundada ya por 1980, nada más ni nada menos por Carl Sagan, Louis Friedman. Yo fui socio de la Sociedad Planetaria casi por 10 años, por todos los 90. Debería ser socio, debería serme de vuelta socio. Y realmente tiene más de 2 millones de miembros alrededor del mundo y es una de las asociaciones que más hace hincapié o esfuerzos por la exploración espacial. Así que quise hablar con Casey para que me cuente un poquito cómo es el proceso de decisión de presupuesto en los Estados Unidos, sobre todo que involucra a la NASA, y qué puede pasar si esto sigue adelante, el por qué, cuál es la justificación, que no la encuentro honestamente, para poder cortar casi hasta el 50% de las actividades científicas de la NASA. Y en realidad, en un general, un 25% del presupuesto de la agencia. Algo sin precedentes y que nunca había pasado en la historia de la NASA. Así que bueno, esta es la charla con Casey Dreier de la Sociedad Planetaria. Casey Dreier, what a pleasure. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you again. I hope it will be under better circumstances. I always have you in my mind to do a chat about space policy or different subjects, but now we are here with this new proposal or budget proposal from the executive branch. And I guess you should be as concerned as everybody.
I'm probably more concerned than most people, frankly, about this.
Can you, even though I'm trying to find explanations about it, and we all want efficiencies and a lot of bureaucracy, I don't think, were you expecting this?
I was not expecting good budget, but this is worse than I expected. And yeah, this isn't a budget that's about efficiency. This is not a budget that's going to reduce waste. It is so dramatic and so aggressive in how fast it cuts money. It doesn't change any fundamental policies. It doesn't change any fundamental regulations. It just takes half of NASA's science money away and a quarter of NASA's total budget away. That guarantees more waste and less efficiency because it's so insanely disruptive.
How? Because even though I try to see this, let me see if I can share with you. I have some slides here that I put together. Obviously, we have this with all the different lines that this is. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is the Office of Management and Budget sending or proposing the budget. Correct?
Yes. Yep, it's the White House's official accounting office, and they put together the official president's budget request, which then goes to Congress, and this is what this is.
And I've been watching your videos and listening to your podcast on the Planetary Radio, and before we get to this point, there was almost like a year of negotiations between the OMB and NASA, correct?
Yes, generally, though obviously we had a change in presidential administration. So the people NASA were talking to at the start of this long process weren't the people who put this budget together. And from everything that we understand about how this came together, NASA had no input in this actual budget proposal. This was handed to NASA by the White House and said, good luck.
And even though I'm trying to understand, well, let's talk about even the tone of the way it was written. This is the skinny version, what they call the skinny version of the budget. It seems to be like a skinny vision,
Yes.
because I'm trying to understand what is the main objective. The only objective that I can see here is the reasoning for cutting science and cutting a lot of programs is to put a man on the moon again before the Chinese. which
But we
I
were
don't.
already doing that. And I think that's what I take away. I think that's a great way to put it. This is a skinny vision. This is a budget that basically takes the universe and reduces it down to Moon and Mars and nothing else, really, right? And the universe is a lot bigger than the Moon and Mars. And this is nominally under the idea of just reducing government spending. But again, NASA right now is 0.3% of every tax dollar is as NASA. So it's very, very tiny. Yes, perfect. And so you cut NASA by a quarter, you've saved what rounds to zero. It is a tiny, tiny fraction. It is not what is driving our deficit. NASA is our long-term investment. It's our technology driver. It's our way to understand the cosmos in which we live. And, NASA does things like even look for asteroids that could come and kill us, which I think is a good long-term play to pay our federal agencies to do. So this isn't even, and again, just the context of this is the largest budget cut for NASA ever requested in American history. This is extreme amount. If this goes through as requested, this would be NASA's smallest budget since 1961, which is before actually we had the first Mercury astronauts going into space, right? A lot has changed in space since 1961. So this is an austerity budget. It is an extreme budget. And again, it has no actual policy. This is a broader kind of ideological attack coming from a certain faction. And I would even argue not even consistent with the president's overall vision for space exploration and U.S. leadership in space.
That's what I was trying to understand. It seems to be like the office or the persons in charge of writing this is like maybe they don't have the understanding. I don't know. I don't want to judge. They don't have the understanding of what NASA is doing in terms of science and the benefits that are bringing for future generations. Because if you look at this pie, this chart, it's 0.3% of the entire budget, and cutting 25% of that, and inside those 0.3, 50% of science, that is not like a meaningful reduction of cost.
Yeah.
It's the other way around.
Right. And again, it's very wasteful because a lot of the things, if this goes through, it'll cancel projects that have already been built. It'll cancel projects that are in space right now, returning great data for just pennies on the dollar. It will ensure that we basically throw away billions of dollars that the taxpayer has already invested and already built. And maybe something also really important to mention here, there are no, SpaceX is not going to fill this gap, particularly in science. That's something NASA does uniquely. The public sector does uniquely because, there's no clear monetary value or market for going to Europa and looking for life in the oceans beneath the ice, right? There's no market for looking deep into the history of the universe and trying to see where we came from. These are important things, though. And this is why we have a public sector to do this. And that we argue, NASA has duplicative stuff with its big rockets. That's what could be given over to the private sector. That's where you could find savings. The science stuff, no one is stepping in to fill that void. So if NASA does less of it, we will just do less and we will functionally kind of retreat from our presence. Like right now we have spacecraft orbiting the sun and we have spacecraft that have gone beyond our solar system with Voyager. That mission Voyager has taken 50 years to get where it goes, where it is. If that gets canceled, you don't replace that anytime soon. You have to, ideally, you spend 10 years building a new one, and then you launch it, and you wait 50 years to get out where it is now, right? So these types of assets that we have are the sum of decades of committed research and irreplaceable if they go
away. Casey, I was watching. I'm going again to this. Let me go again to this. I understand this is taken from I think this is taken from the Planetary Society's website. I understand that the blue areas on this pie cannot be touched by Congress, correct? This is like a mandatory spending, which is Social Security, Medicaid, Veterans Affairs.
Yeah.
So Congress can only decide on the discretionary budget, which is in orange. Do we have any hope that Congress can receive this potential or proposal from executives? No, this is completely wrong. This is impossible.
That is certainly the hope. And I think just to add a little clarity there, all the blue stuff, that Congress can change it, but it takes separate legislation specifically to change it. So things like Social Security, Medicare, veteran support, all these things are basically funded automatically through payroll taxes. So they fund themselves. They spend all by basically calculations.
Okay.
Congress can change it, but they don't because it takes a specific vote. The orange stuff is what Congress has to vote on every single year. That's what's called discretionary. This is when you hear this phrase that the U.S. government is a retirement plan or a retirement, healthcare, and defense plan with an army. Because something like, you look at this number, 85% of what the government spends on is all on social services and defense. Everything else that we do is in that little 13% where NASA sits. And so this is what we always say. If you are serious about cutting spending, you have to go after the blue stuff. They don't because it's super popular. And so going after the little sliver of orange where NASA sits, it's more for show than if you're actually seriously trying to cut the budget.
But what worries me a little bit, Casey, is this chart. Wait, there's another chart. No, this chart, when you can see the president's request, you can see the actual budget, and you can see that they're basically in line over the years. So what is the hope that we can have if this is going to happen again? There's no chance unless Congress says, no, this is crazy. We cannot cut 50% of science.
So you're right. Yeah, the president's request, even though it's a request, tends to set the context of the debate. It tends to align very closely within a few percent of what actually NASA gets. And that's the big worry here. Now, because we've never had such a big cut proposed to NASA, we actually don't know, will that trend continue with such an extreme proposal? I hope not. And I think the reason why we're trying to get people to contact their members of Congress and to tell them that this is important is because that's how this works. And if we don't say anything and we sit on the sidelines, then this will happen and it'll be bad. And we'll lose a generation of exploration. We'll lose a generation of future scientists, engineers, technologists who are going to be in the space program. But we can push back. And so this is the job of Congress to do it. Now, it's complicated because Congress is slow, right? It's deliberative in the ideal sense. It takes a while. And so ideally, you have a Congress passing its own counter budget by October 1st, the start of U.S. fiscal year. They haven't been on time in almost 30 years, and it takes them a while to do it. But we have hope, and this is why we're not giving up. And we have to say, this is really bad. It's irresponsible. You even have, you have Republicans writing that this is a reckless budget for NASA, right? So this is not a partisan issue either, right? NASA still is particularly bipartisan. It is a bad way to, if you want to make things more efficient, if you want to make things leaner, there are strategies to it, but it's not even clear what the strategy is. So this is counterproductive. It's not addressing the president's goals of being leadership in space. And it's a destructive, long-term consequences. So again, I want the universe to be bigger than the moon and Mars. I want to look and find all these big things. And I think, particularly with space science, there is a profound access that gives us to, when it's like when you look at the picture of the Hubble Deep Field and you realize everything on that you think is a star is actually a galaxy full of billions of stars.
It's amazing.
And you feel something that you don't have access to, in most of our everyday life. It's something elevating and transcendental and awe-inspiring. It makes you feel, and that, I don't know, that's a really important thing for me, that we as a nation value that and pursue that, along with all the other benefits that we get. So it's symbolically also, to me, just really sad that we're saying we have this ability to know where we came from, to find life out in the universe if we want to. And we just say, what if instead we just, go on social media and scroll on TikTok or something? Like, that's a sad outcome for me as a society if we do this.
Casey, during the last hearing, I also tried to understand where is Jared Isaacman in all this, because he's not even took office as a NASA administrator. He's about to be confirmed by Senate. But during the last hearing of the Committee of Science, Commerce, and Transportation, if I'm not wrong, Ted Cruz was very specific in asking Jared if he's pro-science, if he's pro-SLS, cislunar economy, because it's in the law. He said yes. So, and now we have this skinny vision budget proposal. So how can we compile both of them?
This tells us that Jared, he hasn't been confirmed. So there's no nominee, there's no empowered head of NASA right now. And as I said earlier, the White House basically did this, and primarily in the Office of Management and Budget, they kind of just threw this at NASA. So they're really setting Jared up, if he is confirmed, to have a really tough go. He was really not, this is unfair to him. He was not able to weigh in on this. And this, again, this is a terrible budget. And once it's proposed like this, any civil servant, anyone who's part of the White House has to now argue and defend it, which is a terrible position for him to be in. So I believe him when he says that he thinks science is important and exploration is important. I believe him when he said he wants to support the congressional directives to, maintain U.S. presence at the moon. This budget counters all of that. But again, he had no say in it, which again doesn't make any sense to me. Again, as a strategic initiative, you want your NASA administrator to maybe weigh in on what NASA should or shouldn't be doing. And you also want, again, what's the broader policy here? What is the nation going to get out of this? Mm-hmm. They don't explain that. They don't go into any depth. And I don't think they've really thought about it because, I argue these are individual factions within the White House pursuing their own priorities. And it's certainly, again, not the president's priority.
And the damage that is inflicting on our international partners, it's unbelievable. I mean, if we are cutting science on space station, reducing the crew missions by half, I don't understand, because we're having 2 per year, and then cutting Gateway, we can agree that SLS is expensive. We can agree that it is maybe it's not the most efficient way to get to the moon, and we can have commercial. But getting rid of or diminishing the importance of the commercial partners, can they? Because they're starting to move away. They're starting to explore other possibilities. ESA with India, even China could open the door. China could open the door to say, "Hey, come to my space station."
They're very much doing that, and just they're sending their samples of lunar soil that they've collected out internationally. It is absolutely an abandonment of our international partnerships and our allies. And that's the other, again, I think there's an ideological component with this administration. But if you think about just a fundamental, meat and potatoes, really practical thing of what space is good for, in a practical sense for a nation, strengthening these relationships, doing a big, complex, peaceful project with your allies, like going back to the moon, like doing these science missions to the sun or around Earth or in deep space. Those help drive collaboration. It helps drive, shared technology. It helps lower costs. And it helps set this is what the United States did actually under the first Trump administration with Artemis is say, look, it's not just the US that's going to go. We are going to go. Come join us if you share these values being open data, scientific discovery, peaceful presentation in space, respect for, various historical sites on the moon. This was an intentional way to build an alliance of shared values. And by just abandoning, a lot of our partners, particularly European Space Agency, who's literally put billions of euros into both Gateway, their Mars rover, many other missions, this is a serious abandonment of that. So it's walking away from our allies, and it's shameful, frankly.
So the problem is even bigger than money. Yeah. It's about values.
It's values, and is the U.S. a reliable partner? Can you trust us? And this is a budget that says no, you can't, and that's as an American, that's terrible.
It's curious because when you see, okay, we are getting rid of the Gateway, for example, but if you see the map of the Gateway and its components, most of them are not being built in the U.S.
Yeah, the Gateway is the real source of international partnership for the return to the moon. It's that sweet spot of the ability of a variety of other companies' technology levels, of other countries' monetary ability to spend on this particular project. It's a lot harder to get to the surface of the moon. There's far fewer international contributions to that lunar surface stuff. The Gateway was that locus of international collaboration because it's basically the same. They literally took the same governing structure of the International Space Station, right, which has 15 nations on it. And they said, now this applies to the Gateway as well. And so that was, to me, like the biggest, broader justification of it, even if it wasn't, in a sense, an engineering sense, it added some complexity. It was the way to foster international partnerships. And that's the value of that.
Casey, who owns the Gateway? Sorry, maybe it's a silly question, but if I'm Thales Alenia and I built a model or the Helio or can they say, no, oh, you don't want it? Oh, just bring it back. I'm going to use it. I will create my own space station. I don't know. Is that possible?
I think technically, so the way that it works on the space station is the same idea. Every nation owns their particular component and then grants, their partner nations the permission to use it and participate in it. I mean, we've been going through this the last few years where Russia has kind of threatened to take their part of the space station and go play somewhere else. They can technically do that. That's what the agreement sets up. They don't because they're so tightly integrated. So theoretically, yes, I think NASA could just say, okay, we're done with this. Here, take what we've built and go nuts with it. Would they? I'm not sure. And, it's still a lot of work to build. And it's also, how would they get there? There's, the European Space Agency, they don't have their own human-rated rockets to get into space, right? So how would they get to the gateway? They don't have an SLS. They don't have... I mean, maybe they could buy flights on Starship, but Starship is not ready yet. So it's more of a question of how would they use it.
In every aspect of, you look at this skinny vision budget, and there's no way to justify it, even like reducing science on the space station right now, which is basically at its peak.
Yeah.
In terms of science, so we need to take advantage of the last years of the space station. It is really
doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, here's like another aspect of values, right? It's science gives you something to do in space for humans in particular, because otherwise, what are you going to do on the space station? Honestly, like if you've read books about astronauts who go to the space station, already maybe half of their time is spent fixing broken things that keep them alive, right? Like the CO2 scrubbers and the toilets and so forth. They spend 25% of their time keeping themselves alive, like by exercising and sleeping, basic human stuff. And so what do they do with that rest of the time? Why are we sending astronauts into space? So they can fix the things that keep them alive. And then what? They stare at the wall or float and stare at the wall. You go to Mars. You want to send astronauts to Mars. What are they going to do when they get there? Again, like just sit and just do nothing, or just labor and dig things or build. Like science gives you that aspect of, we go into space, and then this is when we're there, we can do really interesting things. And by cutting all that and saying it's not important, you're actually, I think, undermining the overall motivation. Science has this fundamental intrinsic value of saying there is value in knowing the cosmos in which we reside and knowing it better, and that there's value in learning how to learn things. And I think, again, this world that would otherwise be proposed by this budget, which is, again, hey, great, we sent humans and they land on Mars, and then they just stare out the window bored because they have nothing to do. Why did we do this, right? What's the value to us? That to me is what begins to be missing. And I think to your earlier question, I don't think Russ Vought, who's the director of OMB, I don't think he really understands the value of science. And he carries this proposal to cut NASA science. He suggested doing this 3 years ago when he was out of power. He suggested cutting NASA science by 50%. So this is his policy. This is his goal to do this. I mean, a lot's happened in 3 years. So the policy is not actually responsive to anything that's happened on the ground, right? This is an ideological desire to undermine NASA science and, frankly, science more broadly across the U.S. government.
I see that basically the main objective is beating China to put a man on the moon. I don't believe. Do you think China is on a race with us?
China would. I think we think we're in a race with China. China. I mean,
I don't think so.
Well, I mean, China lost the race 50 years ago. The U.S. landed on the moon. Like you can't undo that, right? And China has its own long-term ambition. They have their plan. They're executing their plan.
Yeah.
I don't think they really care, frankly, what the U.S. is doing or not. And this desire to frame this purely as this great, I mean, there is a value, I think, to saying what type of symbolic role do you want to have in the global stage? What type of values do you want to apply to where you're going? Who sets the behavior and standards of expectations? But trying to frame this as like a Soviet Union Cold War thing, I think you can only go so far with that, because again, I don't think China is necessarily competing with the US. They just are, and they have their stability. They're doing this in other aspects too. Mars sample return, going to the surface of Mars robotically, grabbing samples and bringing it back. The US is struggling, actually canceled in this budget to do that. China is going to be launching theirs in 3 years. And so there's, they're doing lots of similar things, but I think their plan is independent of what the US does or doesn't.
They don't seem to care. If they set a date, like, oh, we are going to the moon with a crew mission for the first time in 2030. And they don't seem to care if we get there in 27, 28. We're getting there in the 2030. So I don't.
I think China, in a sense, sees space, again, as this primarily a symbolic statement of the national power, technological capability, industrial might, right? All those things are, that's why a lot of countries do this, particularly with human spaceflight. They're clearly, it's a hard thing to do. People know what's, the night sky is in space. They know what the moon is. You see it all the time. It's a very potent symbol. It's always been that way. And China benefits from that symbolic victory, whether or not the US goes there or not, right? Because the point is, I think, to understand China's broad intention here, at least from the political system, is to say that we are now this nation too. Like, we are peers with whatever the US has done. We can do it now too. We are capable of doing incredible things in space. And, particularly as they look around their regional power structures in the South Pacific and in other parts of Asia, this is meant to demonstrate to other nations, again, the might and power and capability of China, which, again, is independent of whether the US goes back or not. So they're executing their own strategy. And I think, it's important to, I'd say, keep that in mind with US policy for these broader capabilities. Again, what it says about us, are we a nation looking outwards, or are we a nation looking inwards and pulling back and retreating, right? And that happens on a lot of fronts. And again, the moon isn't going to be the only way to do that.
Yeah. It looks like seems to me that the China is more an excuse for doing these cuts because I don't see any other justification for
it. Yeah. It's hard to explain because there's no policy statement going along with this that explains what their goals are. And this is, again, it's opaque. It is unclear how this serves the nation. There's a lot of assertions. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about sending humans to Mars, and they say they're putting money towards Mars, but to do what? On what schedule? Even the money they say they're going to spend on Mars, $1 billion, not enough by any means, right? Not enough at all, even with SpaceX. So, and does SpaceX need the money? They don't seem to, right? We don't have to, again, turn over our national goals so rapidly. But again, why? And I think, again, there's no broader policy structure behind this. And so finding a way to say, what are we actually trying to do? For what reason? How does that benefit the nation broadly? That's why we do, we need to explain that in space, because here's the other thing, right? Space is big. It takes a long time to get where you're going. Yeah. It's hard to build things to go to space, even SpaceX, right? It took, SpaceX does amazing things, but they are years late all the time, right? Launching their first astronauts into space was years late. Starship is running behind their initial schedule. That isn't to say they won't do it or can't, but they live in the physical world like anyone else. And 4 years from now, there will be a different president. And if there isn't a broad consensus about why we're going and sending humans to Mars, or that we abandoned our scientific capabilities, or we abandon our partners, then particularly if a different party comes into power, then we abandon that too, right? So you have to plan these things as if they're going to be, you're passing a baton off to another administration. And if you don't build any consensus, why even bother? Because you're not going to get there in 4 years. You just can't. And so that's my other worry, is that by doing this, we actually destroy the future Mars program too, by not building this, by associating it as such a partisan effort without any broader national purpose.
Casey, I don't want to take more of your time. What's next? And what's next? When are we expecting this to arrive to Congress?
Yeah.
And what is it that we can do?
So what's next is at the end of May, we anticipate getting the full detailed proposal saying, here's everything we're exactly going to cut. So this was the skinny. This just gave us the top line numbers. The full detailed justification should come out in a few weeks and say, here's the gory details, basically, of what we're going. Congress at that point will begin. They're going through kind of a longer budget reconciliation process and a lot of politics that we don't have time to go into there. But probably sometime in the midsummer, Congress will release its versions, both the Senate and House versions of its NASA budget. That hopefully will reverse some or all of these cuts. And then what does it take for Congress to finalize a budget? And ultimately, of course, the president has to sign a budget too. So it's a long way to go. This is the speed of politics. And so what we can do in the meantime is what I mentioned earlier, which is if you care about this, if you think this is important, and I do, and I hope you do, and I think there's a broader reason to care about this, you can go to planetary.org. We have a lot of ways that you can facilitate writing your member of Congress, making a phone call. You also have ways, we have online classes, background, anything you want to know about this issue, we have it up there at planetary.org/save NASA science. We also have, and you kind of have to keep staying connected and pushing people to do this. This is an important long-term issue. And then I say even broadly, if you're watching the show, like, are you talking to your friends and family about how useful and interesting this is? Like, just sharing stuff that space is really cool, pictures of Hubble, pictures of the surface of Mars. Like, this isn't something that happens out there. This is something we do here that happens to kind of go out there. But everything, all the money we spend, all this skill and technology and capability, that all happens here. So the more we share it with the people we care about and make it something important, I think that's really good too.
Casey, thank you so much. You've been very, very clear on your explanations. It was a pleasure. Again, I hope it would have been under other circumstances. But I mean,
whenever I show up in the media a lot, things are really bad, and I've been on a lot. So yeah, I'll talk about some happy things sometimes, anytime.
But maybe we can have another chat in September, October, with more optimism, because we saw that Congress is acting.
That would be my ideal discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
For sure.
Thank you again, Casey.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bueno, muchas gracias a Casey, la verdad. Siempre muy claro, muy didáctico, entiende muchísimo del tema. Bueno, a eso se dedica pura y exclusivamente, y yo escucho mucho la Sociedad Planetaria tiene un podcast que se llama The Planetary Radio, o la Radio Planetaria. Si entienden un poquito de inglés, se los recomiendo, es realmente muy bueno. Y además hay un capítulo cada 1 o 2 semanas específico sobre política espacial, donde Casey habla de todas las últimas novedades. Así que no dudé en llamarlo y poder hablar con él sobre esta situación que se está viviendo en estos momentos. Así que espero que lo hayan disfrutado. No te olvides, si te gusta el contenido, de suscribirte a nuestro canal, a seguir acrecentando la familia y a darle like, por supuesto, al video y activar la campanita para que te informe cada vez que subimos un nuevo video. Así que bueno, nos vemos en la próxima.